There's lots of different forces are fighting you. You know, if you try to do something innovative and see people have, they don't want you to do it. For this building, Green Seed Apartments, we were killing watts from the very beginning. When I you have to be tenacious. There's lots of different forces are fighting you. You know, if you try to do something innovative,
And then as soon as it's green, you're live. And just keep in mind.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us after lunch. This is the panel on preserving natural occurring affordable housing, lessons learned from the Oregon Multifamily Energy Program. We're glad to have you joining us this afternoon. My name's Mecca. I'm on this panel, and if you could move to the next slide, I'll introduce, we can introduce you to the rest of our panelists. My name is Mecca Abraham. I work at TRC, and TRC serves as a consultant to OHCS to implement the OHCS Multifamily Energy Program. And I currently serve as the program manager and have been involved on the program since 2017. I've been working in the energy efficiency field for 10 years, mostly on the residential side with single family and multifamily with a focus on affordable multifamily. And before I pass it on to Faith and Patrick, I do want to apologize. I know on the agenda, it says that we were had a property representative of a naturally occurring affordable housing. Given the nature of natural occurring housing, they're very busy. So that was one example of why we couldn't have one here. But we do have a video from one of our participants. So you won't hear from us the entire time. So we'll give you a little break from us later. Pass it on to Faith.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. My name is Faith Graham. I'm with Elevate, brand new with Elevate. So I'm going to lean on Patrick heavily to represent the organization. But unlike Mecca, who's been working in her role for quite some time, I again haven't been with Elevate that long, but I have been in the Oregon market for a very long time and been working with affordable housing my entire career in many different capacities. One thing that I have noticed in what is now advancing in decades of service in this realm is that in housing, we really like to keep things complicated. We complicate all language and try to complexify a lot of things. So my role today, and what I hope you will challenge me on, is trying to keep things as simple as possible. And you're doing me a huge favor if you point out when we're complexifying things, because I'd really love to learn to do that better. So again, thanks for being here, and we'll try to keep this interesting, and we'd love for your participation as we go along.
Hi, my name is Patrick Foley. I'm a senior energy engineer with Elevate. Elevate's a national nonprofit headquartered in Chicago. We design and implement programs to basically have smarter energy use for all and bring the benefits of energy efficiency to low-income renters and people who have traditionally been cut out of that marketplace. Personally, as the senior energy engineer in the Oregon market, I provide technical assistance primarily to construction projects in mixed affordable housing across the state. And we've been working pretty closely with the TRC team at ORMEP for the past few years on with building owners who are moving through the MEP program. So excited to, excited to talk today about the opportunities in naturally occurring affordable housing. Thanks.
Yeah, and if you want to move over to the next slide, we'll go over our agenda that we have today. And I will just start off with that we want to keep this as conversational as possible. So throughout the session, feel free to interrupt us. If you have a question, raise your hand. We want to engage with you and not be a stuffy presentation. First off, we'll do a little welcome and setting the stage of what natural occurring affordable housing is. And then Faith and Patrick will talk about some of their lessons learned from working with natural occurring affordable housing. And then we'll wrap up in the end and throughout the session with a discussion and any Q&A that we have from you all as well. So if we move on to the next slide, wanted to sort of get a feel for who's in the room here today. So I'm going to run through sort of these categories. We want to make sure we're speaking to what's relevant to everyone in the audience. So I guess raising hands would probably be the best way to go about with this. Are there any housing providers in the room? Property owners, developers, finance folks? All right, a good group there. Anyone working on the housing support staff, property management, resident services? All right. And then anyone on design and construction, architects, engineers, contractors? All right. And then community organizations or local government, community-based organizations or policy or program teams. Yes, all right. Okay, and then if you didn't feel like you could raise your hand in one of those categories, you want to sort of share where you're from? Okay, great, thank you. Anyone else that didn't feel like they were represented? Okay. All right, well, thank you. Got a good mix of the folks that we thought we would see in the room here today. I guess also if anyone's willing to share sort of what brought you here, why you're here, what you're hoping to get out of the session, we'd really like to take that feedback at the start to make sure we're covering those points. So I'll see if anyone wants to share anything.
They didn't know where else to go.
All right. Okay, go ahead.
For the online.
Christina Palacios, Unite Oregon. We're a nonprofit organization serving the BIPOC community and preserving natural affordable housing. In our work, we work with housing providers. And when we talk about preserving natural affordable housing, a lot of times that means housing that is in poor conditions. But, to me, it's also like what resources are in the already exist with the surrounding of the building to make it not only be beautiful, but also to make sure that we're using all the resources available so community can save money and be healthier and interact in the community. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I think we'll have some good project samples to cover that later.
I was slightly interested because I also work for N.O.A.H, except my N.O.A.H stands for Network for Oregon Affordable Housing. We're a permanent lender and we have been doing a lot of mobile home or manufactured home park lending. And in doing site visits, I'm always seeing that there are properties that need money to be rehabbed. They're quite run down. And in talking with CASA that does a lot of the preservation, we were talking about, some source of funds to help people do that rehab of their units.
I'm also a former N.O.A.H employee. So nice to meet you.
Hey, I'm Charlene Romani with Bannistar, the asset manager over there. We're going to start working on 2 rehabs. So preservation is like super important to us. Same thing. We're looking for funding, tips and tricks, anything we could do to bring those properties back to, good shape. Because yeah, there's been a lot of we haven't done great, like property management in the past hasn't kept up with like a lot of maintenance. And so it's just like, how can we make up for that?
Thanks, everyone.
Yes, great. Thank you for sharing. I think we'll cover some of those points. And if you feel like you have more questions, please contribute to the discussion as well. All right, if we can move on to the next slide, we'll address this acronym confusion too. What is naturally occurring affordable housing? So throughout this presentation, we're going to be using the term N.O.A.H, not to be confused with other uses of N.O.A.H in the state, like Network for Oregon Affordable Housing. There's also the Northwest Oregon Housing Authority, spelled a little different. So not the best acronym to use in the state of Oregon, but the one that's used nationally. So in the context, N.O.A.H means naturally occurring affordable housing. So what is that to us? So N.O.A.H properties are considered currently unsubsidized affordable rental housing. From our program interactions, this is typically projects that are not tied to any federal, state, or city or municipal subsidized funding. So as part of a program working with OHCS, they're typically projects that have not gone through OHCS funding before. And they're properties that are also affordable to residents with incomes between 60 to 120% of the area median income. And typically what that means is that residents can pay no more than 30% of their income on rent and utilities. So later on, we'll sort of look at what that means in terms of rent and incomes in different parts of the state. And like some of you mentioned, they're often older and lack modern amenities and could definitely benefit from modern renovations. So based on a market assessment that we completed in 2019, as of then in Oregon, there were 7,168 potential NOAA properties. That is equivalent to nearly 200,000 apartment units. That is a substantial number of units in the state, especially in the context of knowing that in the most recent 2021 housing stock analysis, the state found that they need to develop at least more than 500,000 homes in the next home to meet the demand for housing. So it's important that we preserve this naturally occurring housing so we're not contributing to a need of more housing in the state. I know some of you mentioned that you're working in preservation as well. And I think most of those properties are some properties that are serving tied to the subsidized housing, or they may be expiring in their affordability agreements, that 20 or 60 period. So the importance of ensuring that those stay affordable as well. For the purpose of this, we're talking about that unsubsidized, which is kind of hard to track and find as well, which we'll cover. If we move on to the next slide, I guess we kind of touched on, some of you talked about that you are working with NOAAs, you are familiar. I guess by a show of hands, how many of you are familiar with this term NOAA? Have heard of it before under this term or something else? Okay, great. And I guess another show of hands, some of you mentioned that you have some NOAA properties in your portfolio. Any others? I guess anyone, if you have properties, NOAA properties, working with NOAA properties? All right. All right. All right, if we move on to the next slide, we'll take a look at sort of where NOAA properties are. So based on that market assessment that I mentioned, 44% of potential NOAA properties are in Multnomah County. This is equivalent to more than 3,000 properties and 66,000 units. And that sort of I-5 corridor, Multnomah, Washington, Clackamas, and Marion counties, they make up more than 75% of total NOAA units. So I don't think that's completely surprising to all of us in the room, just based on where population demographics are. But if we look at that a little differently as a percentage, if you move on to the next slide, we can show how it sort of shows a different picture. So this is percentage of NOAA units by county. And I will also preface that this analysis and data, it's not easy to identify NOAA properties. We use a database called CoStar, and based on their categorizations to identify potential NOAA properties. And the red counties here indicate that 100% of those units are potential NOAAs. So as you can see, there's, as a percentage, that there's a lot of opportunities to serve the areas in Eastern Oregon and Southern Oregon, rural areas, especially in Indigenous communities as well. Often communities that have less access to programs and resources as well. So as we were doing outreach, these are also some of the areas that we have been targeting as well. Move on to the next slide. I want to put that into context as an energy program, what that means within the energy side of things. So this is looking at energy burden. And what that means is a household's energy burden if they're paying more than 6% of their income towards energy bills. So this is a analysis that was completed in 2019 called the 10-year plan for reducing the energy burden in Oregon affordable housing. It was an interagency effort between OHCS, the Oregon Department of Energy, and PUC. And this mapping, the higher shaded purple zones indicate where the highest energy burden exists. So in Multnomah County, for example, where there are potentially 66,000 estimated N.O.A.H units, the percent of energy burden household is 23.5%. And then over to the right in Malheur County, where it has the highest energy burden among the state, there's about 600 estimated N.O.A.H units there. And the energy burden in that area is close to 45%. So this is sort of targeted data that we can use to further enhance and identify N.O.A.H properties. So we're reaching the residents with the highest need. And then if we move on to the next slide, as part of that N.O.A.H definition, we said that residents, N.O.A.H properties are considered affordable to residents with incomes between 60 to 120% of the area median income. So this is an example based off of OHCS 2022 income limits for tax credit programs like LIHTC. You can sort of see the example at the 60% level, rents ranging from $1,100 for a studio, and then $1,600 up to a 3-bedroom. And then moving on next, this is an example of Malheur County. This is the highest priority energy burden county, rents ranging from $750 to $1,120. And I do want to emphasize that this N.O.A.H property subset, we're looking, I would say, more on like the middle income. It's not sort of the projects that go through that we work with that are going through the tax credits, maybe targeted more towards the lower income. But this is sort of, we want to maintain the affordability within this subset as well. And I think Faith, you want to add?
I just wanted to jump in for a second and just acknowledge that this isn't true for all programs for all properties classified as no. And not that there are many across the state, but this is, this is targeting this income bracket because we think that that bracket is not being served very well. And that it's really difficult to reach. So I think that even through ORMEP, we would serve properties where residents were lower income. It's just that often those properties, at least the ones that come through this program, often are subsidized properties.
Yeah. And also some of the, like Faith mentioned, some of the N.O.A.H projects that do come through the program, they are less than 50%. So it really depends on the project and the community they're serving as well. All right.
Can I jump in one more
Go
time?
ahead.
So do people have a sense of what this property is and what it looks like? Yeah, so lots of head shakes, yes, and a couple of no's. So I know it's right after lunch and Mecca is sharing like rich data
Yes.
with beautiful slides. But I'll try that simplification thing that was super important to me, which is I think we're talking about homes that serve people who have limited incomes. And those homes are not benefiting from a subsidy. And they're affordable, right, to those people who have limited incomes. So that's all we're saying is the rent is lower and therefore affordable to people who have limited incomes. And it's not in a property that has some regulatory agreement. Is that simpler at all? Oh, please.
Yeah, so because our program is focused on multifamily, that's what we have looked at in our program, and the opportunities that we can provide incentives on the energy side. So we haven't looked beyond multifamily.
And correct me, multifamily is 5 units or greater.
Yes, correct.
And we absolutely know that the market is larger than that, right?
Yes.
There's lots of single family and manufactured homes.
And one more note on the typology of that housing stock. I've seen a lot of N.O.A.Hs, and really the date of construction, the construction type, the location is really all over the map. There's everything from a 10-unit masonry that was built in Portland in 1929 to even newer, more recent stuff built in the 90s that might be more rural. So really that housing stock is pretty diverse, and understanding that diversity is important to like our approach to serving that market.
Yeah, and I think if you move on to the next slide, it sort of gives the data side of what those housing characteristics look like. Like Patrick mentioned, oftentimes older building stock. You can see here more than 78% of the properties were built before 1990. And that is around the time when like the energy code was just being established. So there's lots of room improvement for energy upgrades as well. And besides like sort of what those energy bills translate to residents living in those properties as well. And so here's where I'll give the overview on the program just to fill in that context as well. So the Oregon Multifamily Energy Program, known in short form as ORMEP, is a program that's offered by OHCS, and it provides cash incentives and design support for energy efficient upgrades in affordable multifamily rental properties. This includes retrofits and new construction. And the program is funded through public purpose funds, through ratepayers of the two electric utilities, Pacific Power and Portland General Electric. So we provide incentives for energy efficiency upgrades that result in electric savings. Some examples of this include heating and cooling upgrades, like ductless heat pumps, envelope upgrades, windows, insulation, roof and wall, water heating upgrades, whether it's like low flow fixtures or heat pump water heaters, and also lighting and appliances as well. So the goal of the program is to reduce the energy burden for residents across multifamily affordable housing by influencing the design of the building. So working with the design and construction teams, owners and developers to implement energy efficiency upgrades to reduce the consumption in the building. And then also through the efficient building energy use. So working with residents, making sure they can understand sort of the consumption in their units and how they can sort of optimize it to be as low as possible given the climate and systems in the building as well.
Just one thing about, especially as we're getting into the energy efficiency portion of this, we're really getting towards the crux of the point of this approach, is kind of establishing a scenario where it's a win-win-win for the program, for the property owner, and for the tenants. That if we can leverage, higher energy incentive amounts in these properties that aren't currently subsidized or don't currently have any agreement to, limit the rent on these units, that we can bring energy efficiency improvements to these units, lowering the bills for tenants, while also, helping that owner make improvements to their capital, their property, with those higher incentives, and meeting statewide and global climate goals of reducing energy consumption. So that's where I get really engaged in this, is like, this can be a win for everybody.
Yeah, go ahead, Christina. Mm-hmm.
cannot afford to do that.
Mhm.
So what is different?
So if you move on to the next slide, that is a component of the program. And it's really great feedback. We do want to get feedback on like how something like a requirement like that may not work in all circumstances, and how we can adapt and be flexible to serve more residents across the state. So that is a component of the program in an effort of preserving affordable housing. One of the requirements is meeting the program affordability requirements, which asks that residents in at least 50% of the units are at or below 80% AMI. So comparatively amongst other OHCS programs, it's a little higher, a lower threshold on the AMI and also on the year requirement, because it's specifically for energy upgrades. But that is sort of our mechanism to preserve affordable housing. And I think also like sort of the 50% of the unit requirements also give some flexibility with the remaining units as well. So those are some of the mechanisms we have to make the agreement more flexible. I'm not sure from your experience if that would be helpful.
From my experience, and I hear similar things. So it can work for like bigger like investors, right? Like multifamily, sometimes out of state owners, because they have a bigger portfolio. But I'm always thinking like, why have hardcore rules for mom and dad owners of like one or two apartment complexes? Sometimes it's even one, and they are housing like 20, 50 people per unit. So there needs to be flexibility. Is my conclusion.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah, Christina was basically describing about how with mom and pop ownerships, the need of more flexibility within program requirements. And, I think we provide very rich incentives in an effort to primarily serve affordable housing and maintain that. But we've heard from a couple of that type of like mom and dad ownerships of like, oh, I'm already meeting that, I can do that. And others, I'll show you a screenshot of our grant agreement. That can be very intimidating and overwhelming as well. So we do want to make sure if you're entering into the agreement, you really know what you're signing up for, and that you're not sort of the short-term incentives are not sort of taking away sort of the long-term commitment you're making as well.
And I just add to that a little bit that like a lot of those mom and pop owners that you're talking about are basically already meeting those requirements, that over 50% of their residents are at or below 80%. So they're kind of already meeting those requirements. And then we come to them and say, if you agree to keep meeting those requirements and keep housing this population of residents, then we have richer energy incentives to help you make improvements to your building, which also, is good for that long-term investment of the property to be able to access these improvements to the physical infrastructure of the building and increase the value of that asset. So.
Yeah, but I think as we keep going on through our presentation, we'd love to chat more because I know that this is a barrier that we've encountered too. So like, how can we find the right middle ground there as well? All right, if we move on to the next slide, I think Faith, you're up.
Well, this slide is a bit of a more of a national perspective, and we'll get more into the Oregon perspective. But again, why are we focused on this particular kind of property or kind of home? We know that this is an opportunity to preserve affordability, right? If 40% of rental properties we know need upgrades, again, from the national perspective, how do we get them funds to do that so that we can preserve the housing, both just the asset itself and the affordability? We know also that limited income renters are paying more than 30% on their rental, their cost of their rental and for the utilities. So this is an opportunity to provide those that need it most with the form of incentive that's helpful. We also know that this is an opportunity for us to address climate change and create resiliency. And we know also that here's one of the barriers. Christina, you didn't quite name this one, but I know that you know this one too, is that this is mostly owned. This kind of property is mostly owned by smaller businesses, and those smaller businesses don't have huge staffs to manage all the construction projects or everything else that's associated with upgrading your building and making improvements. So both from a time, a capital, and a support perspective. And so this program is attempting to really alleviate some of those concerns. On the slide, the left side there, if I'm looking at it correctly, nope, the right side. We know that this is a huge portion of affordable stock that's out there, and it's pretty much untapped, right? Because it's really difficult to serve. That's what we know, and so we're all feeling incredibly privileged that OHCS is being really proactive about this and recognizing this as a preservation opportunity and an opportunity to address resiliency.
Yeah, thanks, Faith. Yeah, and if you move on to the next slide, Faith kind of touched on why we're reaching NOAAs. I'm gonna add kind of like some specificity from the program perspective. I think Faith already talked about how NOAAs have limited resources and staff to know what's out there. So if we can proactively reach them, oftentimes when we connect with NOAA properties, they hadn't previously heard about the program. If they're submitting an interest form, they're usually coming through an internet search. So because they're not tied into like the world of OHCS, they may not be as familiar with all of the services out there. And they may find that affordable housing programs may be intimidating. So as an energy program, we can be a good entry point into the world of affordable housing programs. And sort of how can you utilize other sources within OHCS, municipal agencies like Portland Housing Bureau. So that's where we're trying to provide resources. Not only can we help you with this source of funding with energy incentives, but here are other opportunities for you as well. And like I mentioned, with the 10-year affordability agreement, that also ensures preservation of that housing as well. So that I think is our ultimate goal here, to ensure that those units stay affordable as well. Faith or Patrick, did you want to add anything else? Okay. All right. So before the Elevate team joined us, within our team, we were trying to proactively, along with OHCS, reach NOAA properties. So the first challenge is finding those NOAA properties. The CoStar database provided contact information, and first we tried to reach out to like sort of the big owners that had multiple properties. It's hard to connect with those folks. And I think within the mom and pop type of ownership, that's the ones that we had the most reception, and we also identified needed the most support as well. So those kind of came through, like I mentioned, internet searches. And now we've been able to do more targeted connections with cities that know sort of the properties that are going on, and they're able to spread the word on the program as well. And then there's an aspect of making the program communications more accessible. So this is an example of a fact sheet, our program manual. If you're familiar with like program manuals, they're very lengthy, like a 30-page, very dense document. So how can we make it easier so the first document that you read about the program isn't as overwhelming? So this is a fact sheet that we created, just kind of simplified the requirements of the program. And especially, we really wanted to make it clear that regulatory grant agreement aspect, which would, and walking through that regulatory agreement through phone calls, coordinating with OHCS on their team. if a N.O.A.H property had any questions, we want to make sure that they fully understand all of the requirements, the 10-year affordability, and the rent requirements that the program, income and rent requirements as well. So if you move on to the next slide, this is sort of that example of that grant agreement. So it's fairly text heavy, 25 pages filled with legal jargon, but it's also a very important document. So legal binding agreement. So I think some of these properties, they need the funds and incentives. And although that will provide, we don't want the short-term receipt of an incentive to, we want to make sure they fully understand sort of the long-term commitment to maintaining the affordability as well. Go ahead.
So a while ago, I was working for the housing director of an organization that owned and self-managed properties. And one of the biggest, I don't remember if it was Oregon Housing or the county's weatherization dollars, but each of the properties had to be individually metered in order to qualify for any type of weatherization funding. And that was a huge hurdle. Has that been resolved?
We don't have that requirement within our program. We can accept master metered or any type of metering configuration. So within our, I can only speak on behalf of this energy program. Faith, actually, as part of our work, the Elevate team did some exercises to be able to like translate this. Faith, do you want to kind of speak to that?
I'll just say lawyers, am I right? I mean, come on. You and I didn't see any in the room, right? Yeah, I know. I'm recovering. I'm a recovering lawyer. So certainly this is not legal advice in any way, but we did go through that 25-page agreement and try to just lift out the material terms in part because legalese is not the most accessible information. And sometimes it's just overwhelming. It is for me, right? To just get a document and supposed to translate that. So we just tried to lift up the most material terms to determine for folk, so people could tell us, is this something that you can actually live with? Because, to lift those up. So that was just something that we're doing and we're thinking about as we go forward, how we just meet people where they are and make it more accessible.
Great, thank you. And then just onto the next slide, if we continue on, some of our early exercises in our N.O.A.H engagement was to offer free energy audits to do assessments at their property. A lot of the times when we were connecting with N.O.A.H properties, they knew they needed energy upgrades, but they didn't know where to start. So typically we would encourage a participant to work with an energy consultant who can be with them through the life of the project, through assessment, design and construction and installation. But that also comes with a cost, and we know there's a cost burden to make that first step. So the program team would go out on site as needed to help in that first step to guide through the program and the opportunities. We've since expanded on that, which Patrick will talk about, and then just staying connected throughout the program stages. Oftentimes N.O.A.H property owners, they're very busy and they wear multiple hats, like Faith had mentioned. I'll be going over some of our projects. The lifespan can be anywhere from 2 to 3 years for some of these projects. So it takes time and keeping that connection and relationship ongoing so they know that we're here to help when the timing works out for them, because there's also finance elements, getting the funds as well. So all of that. I will also mention just to date, we don't have a ton of N.O.A.H participants. N.O.A.Hs make up about 5% of our pipeline, actually 5 projects out of 100. So we recognize the need to grow that, and we want to serve more N.O.A.H projects. And we're looking for your help here today of how can we reach N.O.A.H projects? If you know them, how can we connect with them? Traditionally, I don't think we have a shortage of projects in the pipeline. They're traditionally coming through that they're going through OHCS funds, whether that be tax credits or other programs like in the N.O.A.H programs. But there is this opportunity to directly and reach NOAAs, which we're trying to prioritize. All right, if we move on to the next slide, wanted to show some example projects of NOAA. So the first one, this is a project in Silverton called Twilight Courts. It's a retrofit project, 30 units, and it's a really unique project. It's all volunteer run, a small group of folks within that neighborhood, in that community that are making upgrades. And they had an interesting approach. They were adding a 4-unit building, and first they constructed that 4 building, and the rest of the 8 buildings with 4 units, they upgraded those buildings. So first they did the new construction 4 units, and then did a staged approach to make sure that none of the existing residents there would be displaced. They just wrapped up this summer, and they installed ductless heat pumps, thermostats, in-unit lighting, window replacements, and through the program, we were able to fund $55,000 in incentives. We also work closely with the Energy Trust of Oregon program. So between the 2 programs, we could collaborate to make resources spread out. Go ahead. I can't remember off the top of my head. Julia, do you remember? We typically cover around like 30% of the incentive of the costs of the project. So there is a gap to fill as well. All right. Moving on to the next project. This is called CRAWL, which stands for Community Recovery and Wellness Living. This is a great team, a husband and wife team, Wade and Evelyn Harris. The organization, they lead the Seed of Faith Ministries. The site used to be a former medical center, and there's a church on site, and part of the building, which used to be sort of patient rooms, have been converted to SRO units. So this is for transitional housing for residents in recovery, and the CRAWL team provides support for the community members that need that support. And I know at Wade and Evelyn, they wear many hats and doing a lot of work, and N.O.A.H was actually the energy consultant on this project. We first learned about this project in fall of 2020, and it's still in progress. It started reserved incentives in winter of 2021 and currently in progress. So I think Patrick can sort of speak more about the work that they're doing there.
Yeah, it's a really interesting project, and it's interesting. Several of the N.O.A.H projects we're looking at right now and I'm involved with are actually kind of interesting, innovative, adaptive reuse projects, where, it's not really your traditional, like, oh, here's an affordable apartment building. It's here's an old building that was, a school or a medical facility, and it's, being adapted and renovated to serve a new purpose. In the case of CRAWL, as Mecca mentioned, it was a existing medical and clinical facility with a chapel on site that's now being renovated as kind of that transitional housing for folks in recovery. Another kind of aspect of some of this work is that a lot of times the contractors that are doing this work, they don't have a huge development team that's familiar with working through OHCS requirements and funding programs. So they tend to take a little more handholding and a little more support to make sure that the work they're installing is in compliance with the requirements of the program. That required us as the energy consultants to spend a little bit more time reviewing the subcontractor bids and working with the general contractor to make sure that at the end of the project, we don't have any issues in the verification process, because we've really made sure everything is really clear up front. So far they've done the roof insulation. Most of the window replacements have been done. And through the end of this year and potentially into a little bit of next year, they're going to be doing the heat pump hot water heaters, heat pump heating, as well as lighting retrofits.
Great. Thanks, Patrick. All right, we'll move on to the last example project. This is Green Seed Apartments. And I would just preface that this is not your typical NOAA. I think this is a new construction project, and the property owner and developer Seed LLC, they own the building and manage the property in-house. The owner this is the video that we'll be sharing next. Bill Reed comes from a construction background, so he was able to apply sort of as owning a contract company, achieve this net zero level target, take lessons learned, and take some risks here and there as coming from being the contractor and having that construction background. So take a break now, and we'll play that video next.
You have to be tenacious. There's lots of different forces are fighting you. You know, if you try to do something innovative and see people haven't seen it before, they don't want you to do it. For this building, Green Seed Apartments, we were killing watts from the very beginning. When I was developing the plans, every watt was an aggravation to me, and I tried to figure out how to kill it. They call me Bill, they call me Pop sometimes, and they call me the Watt Killer. So when you look at trying to minimize energy use, the first thing you look at is the shell. Then the second thing you look at is air infiltration. Very important to have a good hot water system. That's the next biggest thing. Then after that, you start trimming it down. You know, how does the fans fit in? How do the lights fit in? How do the, appliances fit in? The Oregon Multifamily Energy Program contributes a lot. It knocks down the cost of each apartment by about $3,000. It helps that we own the building, we're going to manage the building. We can take a few more chances with how the building is going to function. We took the trees that we cut down, and then we used a lot of the wood throughout the building. We used extreme advanced framing construction. Everything is on 24-inch centers. We've eliminated 90% of the headers. We probably cut 50% of the lumber out of the building. We do rainwater collection here to flush the toilets. We inject the water that we don't use back into the ground. We use a geothermal heat loop system. We bury pipes in the ground so that we can take advantage of the constant temperature of the earth. This is the geothermal collection unit. The heat pump squeezes the energy out from the ground, and then it puts it back into this system here, which is what distributes it to the building. The feature that these tenants would be looking at are energy efficiency and camaraderie. Being able to live in a place that actually has an environment that is healthy for you.
Right. So I think that case study is a good example of we shared a definition of what NOAAs are, and this is kind of, there's no one size fits all of what a NOAA is. I think Bill is doing a lot of innovative work, and I think if we can apply our lessons learned between NOAA properties, that's where as a collective group, we can sort of make change and learn from each other. So where we're at now is we know we can do better to support NOAAs, and the first step was we partnered with an organization who know NOAAs. So Elevate, they bring in the energy as an energy consultant perspective. They can bring in a lot of great support, and one of that, which Patrick will get to, we can provide as a dedicated ORMEP energy advisor to support NOAA properties at no additional cost, including an energy audit, energy modeling, verification, and construction support. So this is sort of the things that we're looking at for the next iteration of the program. And with that, I think I'll pass it on so Faith and Patrick can talk more about sort of the work that they're exploring.
Great. Can you advance the slide? Advance the slide, please. Thanks. So I'm going to be really brief because I feel like we've really covered all the topics a couple of times. And Patrick already introduced Elevate, where it's a 20+ year nonprofit that was started in Chicago. It was really started in response to community saying, yeah, we're not really happy with rolling blackouts and we'd like energy. And we'd like heat and power. And so Elevate worked with communities to figure out, well, how the power companies can't provide all the energy that's that's on demand at the moment. So what do we do, right? And they came up with some pricing schemes and supports with respect to that. And ever since, Elevate has really been dedicated to solving tough questions for community with the goal of working alongside community to make sure everyone has an affordable home in which they have adequate energy, heat, and water. So that really is the goal. We primarily work with low income or limited income folks, and we primarily work in the residential space. About 10 years ago, Elevate, and I know because I was one of these people, got really sick of everybody from around the country saying, how did you do that one-stop shop program? How did you work with affordable housing and actually institute energy efficiency programs? I was one of those. And so they decided that maybe they could actually take that expertise into different parts of the country. And so Elevate's been here for about 5 years. I'm brand new, but Patrick's been here for about 5 years. And we've got a couple of colleagues as well. So in addition to working in the Oregon marketplace and looking also in Washington to doing one of these programs, there's a couple of existing programs which we're really pulling from the lessons that have been learned in Madison, Wisconsin, and there's Missouri and Delaware. There's a couple of programs that we're really looking at and learning from. So we get the advantage of watching to see what others have done and what's working and what's not working. So I think I'll just pass it on from there. Oh, I think we have one more slide. Can you pass that next slide? We've talked a lot about the barriers already. So I'll just name what these things are. It's a really tough to find these owners because it's a disaggregated space, right? So when you ask anyone, how do I find out who actually owns these properties? It's hard to find. They're not already going through a program. When we do, we know that the owners are juggling a lot of things, right? Because they generally are smaller owners. And so they don't have, unlimited staff and unlimited resources to investigate new opportunities. We know, this is a big one we haven't talked too much about, but there's huge risk of losing this housing because of gentrification, right? Right now, housing costs are very high. And there's always a risk that this housing disappears and we're continuing to make our affordable housing crisis even worse. So it also means that, to a point that was earlier raised, it's often hard to convince owners that they should, for a very big benefit of getting a bunch of incentives to improve their buildings, the risk associated with the unknown of limiting your income in the future is a tougher sell in this kind of a market. And then this is what we've talked about. There's some complexity involved, and so there's a bunch of things that without some kind of wraparound navigator support is difficult to manage. So that's all I'll say, because I think we've gone over the barriers quite a lot. And so I want to turn it to Patrick to tell you all about the solutions to all of that.
Yeah, I think we've spoken about the barriers, and you can move to the next slide. We've kind of broken these barriers out into project phases where these barriers show up. So that's really the outreach portion of the project, design and planning, construction, and then the verification. Each of these project phases has its own individual hurdles to the NOAA properties accessing the program. So, in the outreach phase, we've talked a bit about how we identify these properties, what we're doing today, talking to people about our ideas and the plan and the program, and really getting the message out that we we have a plan and we have a way to serve these properties. If you have one, we can help you figure it out. In the design and planning phases is really one of the most important phases, because a lot of these owners, even once they learn about the program, they may know that they have a property that hasn't been super well maintained for 20 years, but they don't know, they might know that they need new windows or they know they need new furnaces, but to actually understand which of those things is going to have the best impact on their tenants and impact on the utility bills compared to the cost of installing those things. So that's where we come in, perform an energy assessment that takes a look at, what is the existing building? What is your existing insulation like? What are the existing heaters, hot water heaters? What's your opportunity for solar PV generation? So we'll put together all of that, all of the information that we find from our on-site assessment and put together a report that has all of the opportunities that property could implement, along with a ballpark estimated cost as well as savings to give the owner an idea of how long it will take that measure to pay for itself, along with the available incentives for that measure. And that's where we can really tell a story to an owner who's considering this investment to say, okay, we're talking about asking you to potentially limit your income on this property for 10 years. But if this, if this water heater installation pays itself back in 7, you're ahead, and that's a good thing to do. And then to move this project towards construction, part of that involves, working with the owner and the design team to find contractors, to put scopes of work together, make sure those scopes of work are in line with the recommendations we made in the report. We will also assist those owners with looking through those proposals they receive and selecting a contractor. Once we have that scope of work together and we have those proposals, we'll help coordinate with the ORMEP side and with the OHCS team to submit that reservation document so that they know that the funding is reserved at the state level for when they complete this project. As we move through, once we have that reservation in place, we can start moving through construction. And there's a lot of different ways that these properties need help with construction, whether it's scheduling, monitoring progress, helping the contractors even understand the requirements that they need to comply with. And then, we also work with the owner, the contractor, and the program to make sure that these funds are being spent responsibly and the completed work is, as everybody expected it to be, a high quality, energy efficient installation. And part of that, leads to putting together verification documents so that the state can cut that incentive check to the owner at the end of the day. I think that's pretty much all we had. So if we have any other, comments, questions from the audience, we'd love to hear what people have on their minds.
Anybody know what a N.O.A.H is?
I have a comment. Well, I had two things. You were saying it was difficult to find natural affordable housing. If you go to East Portland, you'll find like 100 right there. So I will suggest know where the BIPOC community lives, because that's where those buildings exist, like the others. I never had a problem finding those buildings. So that's my suggestion. If you look on the maps and see where BIPOC community lives, you're more likely gonna find them. And displacement is a big thing. So, or BIPOC community are being pushed outer. So therefore, when thinking about N.O.A.H projects, it's also important to think about sustainability, because you get homeowners get one-time incentive for 20 years, 10 years, whatever the term is. But we all know, I mean, I've been a homeowner. I was a renter for many years. I now live in a mobile home, manufactured home. And repairs are going to happen. And the landlord is not going to be able, I mean, speaking about, not big companies. I know, their gains on money, but at the same time they spend money. So if they're going to have to make all those necessary repairs to keep them, it will be a good idea to have N.O.A.H say, okay, you're going to get into this program, get, I don't know, 100K for this year, but moving forward, the next 20 years, you get, I don't know, 10,000, whatever amount for repairs. That way, we're helping people to stay housed in good conditions and not putting the burden on any of them, the landlord or the tenant. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that feedback. On your first point, I will just add that part of our work to reach N.O.A.H properties is working with community-based organizations and BIPOC community as well, because I think if they can share the word on these opportunities, we'll have better reception to it than. Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah. Yes. We do. We actually formed a DEI coalition with CBOs, and they are paid members. So we do want to make sure we're paying you for your time as well.
I'm just wondering, a lot of the examples seem to have mission-driven organizations that rightfully so would want to reduce the utility burden for tenants. For private for-profit entities, have there been any conversations or understanding on what the incentive would be to have a program and requirements and rent stabilization policies when a lot of those private entities are having the tenants pay the utility costs? So what is the incentive for those entities? And maybe there isn't, but I'm just curious on scaling the program, what opportunities there are for profit private market to take advantage of this program.
Yeah, the program is open to any ownership model, mission-driven, nonprofit, for-profit, affordable housing owners, the developers. So we're not limited in that front. I think our upgrades incentives go directly to the owner and developer that's paying for the cost of the upgrade. So if we do hear from residents from time to time, and that's where we're trying to educate also the owner of opportunities with this program as well. So I think there are other programs that provide like utility allowances for residents as well, weatherization of upgrades as well. Hopefully that answered your question.
I think and you bring up a point that's really been on my mind a lot for the entire time I've been in this industry. And it's that we're trying to convince somebody to make an investment that they're not necessarily directly seeing the benefit from. If you replace your tenant's baseboard electric resistance heat with a heat pump, you're not saving money on your energy bill, your tenant is. Now in that private industry mode of thinking, you can subsequently raise the rent on that unit to capture that reduction in utility bills. And, ideally the market and the explanation of the efficiency of the unit that kind of captures that information. In this situation, where we're, asking an owner to agree to this affordability agreement, that's kind of what this incentive is getting at, is that we understand that you're not seeing a direct financial benefit immediately on your energy bills for doing this work. So we're going to help you pay for it. It does still increase the value of your property to have these newer, higher efficiency amenities. And, you're going to have ideally happier, healthier tenants with less turnover in your property. So I think that you're really getting at a root problem of implementing energy efficiency in rental housing. When it comes to, businesses deciding what energy efficiency technologies they're going to install, the conversation is a lot more straightforward because they're seeing the immediate reduction on their energy bill. I would also say some of the measures, are the incentive, the measures that these incentives are supporting also apply to common area loads. So when we put together a solar assessment for a property, we might put together a solar assessment that says we can cover 100% of the common area utilities for this property and eliminate your annual utility bill to PGE with a PV system, or through a combination of lighting, HVAC, and then solar offsets. So
The split incentive is hard, and the return on investment still has to make sense for everyone. So that is what the incentive level is supposed to get at. And what we've heard in other markets, I think, is what Patrick has said as well, is like the increase in the asset value, even if you're not going to realize it right away, does mean something. And if you have, obviously, if you have happier tenants with less turnover, it also, that's also an operating cost. But you have to, the return on investment has to make sense.
On the affordability and who's meeting the criteria too, that I think is potentially a larger burden for them.
Yes, that is something that we are trying to figure out how to make that easier as far as like the compliance during that 10-year period and not overly burdensome as well. So that's something that OHCS outside of our program is looking into as well.
As I understand it, the Oregon MEP program is going through a bit of a revamp. I think one of the things that the program is attempting to address are, I guess, some shortcomings in like equity and inclusion. Could you kind of talk about the revamp, like just kind of high level, what what you guys are looking at, and what I guess like the timeline for when these new criteria will be made available?
Yeah, sure. So we are currently operating on a wait list. We have a fairly long wait list, and relative to the funds that we have available, it is now a competitive, more, we can't fund all the projects that are in the program at the moment. So with that in mind, as I mentioned, we recently formed a program specific DEI coalition. And with that group, we are assessing how to prioritize projects so we can serve the projects with the highest need. And that we're working on that at the moment. So stay tuned for more information. But the elements of that is prioritizing BIPOC communities, BIPOC residents, rural areas, areas in the state with the highest energy burden. We know that there are a lot of projects, so how can we make sure we're funding the projects that need the incentives and can serve the residents with the lowest energy bills in the long term? So later this fall, you should have more information coming.
Any lingering questions?
I guess I could have some questions for you all, because we could get as much feedback from your expertise as well. I know, Christina, you mentioned like where to find some BIPOC communities. I guess if anyone is elsewhere in the state, if you know of any N.O.A.H properties in the state, we'd love to hear where you think there's a need or where we should be targeting our efforts as well.
Okay, I'm going to try one. So we heard ROI. We heard return on investment. That's an important consideration. Anything else? What are we missing? Yeah, great.
Deferred maintenance issues. A lot of these older places, they haven't updated their electrical panels. So you've got to have things in place first to do these upgrades.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's something that has come into conversation, especially if we're going from like electric resistance to the ductless heat pumps that may require an electric panel upgrade. That is where our program, like we're trying to find the balance of the incentives because we're focused on the energy savings as well. But I think where we're trying to look to is how can we collaborate with other state agencies and incentive programs that are also have other incentive funding so we can layer that, like with Oregon Health Authority and Healthy Homes and Resiliency. How can we stretch our dollars within an energy program and layer it with like similar programs? Right, yeah. We can call it there. Yeah, thank you for joining us.
So not related to N.O.A.H, but just curious about 45L credits and if you guys do any work with that or have any guidance on it. We're a developer and I have a project down in Tillamook and we're looking at it. It's going to bring, could potentially bring a significant source of equity to our project. It's an existing Section 42 project, put new credits on it and whatnot. But just looking for guidance. I'm very new to the 45L. Yes. Yeah. Right. Uh-huh.